Welcome back to the Space Terminal Online Summit, and we shall go on with the future. Our next guest was trained as an astronomer before working for the European Space Agency on a variety of science projects. I don't know if you knew that about him. He started publishing science fiction in 1990 and has now produced more than 60 short stories as well as 14 solo novels. So please welcome Alastair Reynolds. Hi there.
Hello. Hi.
Perfect. We can see you, we can hear you. And I don't know if you heard you were mentioned in the previous presentation.
I did, yeah, thank you. Wonderful, a great company to be mentioned in.
Yeah.
The wonderful Ian Banks, who we miss tremendously in the UK. Yeah.
We heard about, so to say, the past of science fiction. And how do you think the story of the future of science fiction begins? So what is now?
Well, science fiction, I think one of the reasons that we can even still have a conversation about science fiction is because it's a form of literature that never really, it doesn't really have an expiration date. It doesn't have a sell-by date, because you can look at other sort of literary forms, particularly sort of genres like the Western, that had their time, and and then they were very popular, and then they kind of faded away. But science fiction is endlessly renewing, and that's because the world around us
is endlessly renewing.
Exactly. It keeps changing.
Exactly.
And keeps throwing stuff at us. And the future is sometimes scary, sometimes exciting, sometimes both of those things at the same time. And that provides the sort of creative stimulus for each new generation of science fiction writers. And right now, the science fiction field is really opening itself up to, I would say, more diverse voices, not just sort of Americans and Brits, but also people from all around the world, people from different ethnic backgrounds, different cultures. And they're finding that science fiction is a really useful and exciting toolkit to express the ideas and concerns that they find themselves having at this, at this interesting point in history.
Do you have favorite stories, favorite examples of innovations and stories that became already our reality, but before it was just science fiction?
Well, you can look at the history of science fiction. There's many sort of instances where science fiction played with an idea that then became reality. Many cases where science fiction got it completely wrong as well. Sometimes things go backwards. So in the 1960s, when we had the moon, the Apollo program, the general consensus was that the science fiction of the sort of 1920s and 1930s had got it completely wrong, because in those science fiction books, it was often, say, a millionaire or an entrepreneur would build a rocket in their backyard and go to the moon, rather than a sort of government space agency. But now things have come sort of full circle, because now we do have sort of...
We just have to look around and see all the millionaires.
So in a way, it's sort of ending up being the sort of way science fiction had it nearly 100 years ago, which is it's just sort of rich people are now sort of doing things in space. So sometimes science fiction gets things right, but it takes a long, circuitous route to get there.
Sometimes science fiction really paints a very dystopic future. For example, now I'm reading the Dune. Well, this is my first time with the Dune. I read the book, and how can society prepare themselves for futures like that?
Well, Dune. I read it. I reread it this summer. So I read the book again. I think the last time I read it was nearly 40 years ago. So for me, it was interesting.
It was time to reread. Yeah, because of the new movie and all that.
Yeah, and I wanted to see how it kind of measured up to my recollection. And I kind of enjoyed it. It's a kind of weird thing that it's sort of half of it's dystopian, half of it's utopian, half of it's somewhere in the middle, because I think it's such a complicated future that Frank Herbert came up with that, if you're one of the wealthy families in this future that get to participate in interstellar trade and live in palaces and travel from world to world. It's
and
not
have
really,
water, yes.
yeah, it's
Yeah,
not really,
exactly.
it's not really dystopian. It's actually quite cool if you're enormously rich in the or politically connected in the Dune future. But then, of course, you've got the sort of Fremen who are sort of trying to sort of eke out an existence in the margins of the planet with this enormous attention to detail when it comes to water conservation. But at the same time, they seem like kind of fun people to hang out with. You know, they sort of have a cool sort of culture living in
those
caves,
blue eyes, of course.
and they
Exactly.
you know, they have poetry and they sing songs. So is that dystopian? I don't know. It's a book that to me I don't really think of it as sitting in that kind of camp. The type of science fiction I write, I never really think of it as, is this dystopian or is this utopian? It's just, I'm just thinking about ideas about the future and trying to present a kaleidoscope of different concepts and impressions to the reader, and looking at all different sort of strata of society. So in any future, there'll be winners and losers, I think. So I really don't think of it in those terms.
Sure. And now we have incoming questions. So, it's a very nice question. It's partly about you. Is it common that sci-fi writers are such educated in space technology as you are?
No, well, I mean, I can't speak for other writers, but when I was much younger and I wanted to be a science fiction writer, I had this totally incorrect idea that you needed to kind of have a science education to become a science fiction writer, because the writers that I was particularly influenced by and admired when I was younger were writers like Isaac Asimov and Arthur C. Clarke, and what did they have in common? They'd studied science. Asimov had been a biochemist or a chemist, and Arthur C. Clarke had worked in physics and the development of radar. And then other writers that I liked, like Joe Haldeman, he'd also had a physics degree. So I thought, you have to have this. They won't let you into science fiction unless you've got a science background, which is complete rubbish. And some of the best science fiction ever written was written by people from completely outside of science. But I mean, I'm not sorry that I took that route into science fiction, because it gave me, I suppose it gave a certain quality to my writing that I could draw on, which was that I lived and worked scientific research for 20 years. So I knew about the culture of science. I'm quite comfortable thinking about scientific ideas, and I'm interested in the entire spread of science, not just astrophysics and physics. I'm also interested in biology, neuroscience, you name it.
It's good to hear. I'm a biology teacher,
yeah.
so I'm very enthusiastic about that too.
Good. Yeah.
We have another question. In the previous presentation, we briefly spoke about that by writing and reading science fiction, we create our own future. And the question from the audience is partly about that. How stories predict challenges of the future? So how does this thing work? What do you think?
Well, I think science fiction is not about predicting the future. And if it was about predicting the future, it'd be very, very bad at it. But it is about one of the things it does many things. I sometimes think of it as being like a Swiss Army knife. You can use science fiction for almost any literary purpose. But one of the things that interests me is using science fiction as a tool to explore the future. And I use this expression. It's a tool for mapping the space of possible futures. So we can look into the next 20 years or the next 200 years, and we can use science fiction as a sort of collective thought experiment where we look at things that maybe are likely or less likely, and we can use science fiction to explore the likelihood of things. So for instance, we might look at science fiction and say science fiction at the moment would be a good literary tool to explore the ramifications of artificial intelligence, for instance, or superhuman artificial intelligence. That's something that it may or may not happen, but it's certainly something of concern that a lot of people around the world are engaged in thinking about. And science fiction is a very good tool for looking at all the different aspects and implications of artificial intelligence. And in the same token, there's been a sort of drift in science fiction, an interest in thinking about climate and climate futures in a way that's been very useful. And writers like Kim Stanley Robinson, who has always had an interest in, I think, ecosystems and environments, way back to when he was writing about Mars and colonizing Mars. His sort of focus shifted over the years to thinking about, life on Earth and climate catastrophe on Earth. And because he's played with those ideas so intelligently and in such depth over the years, he now gets to go to COP26 and speak as an informed expert on climate change. So he's not someone with a scientific background in that sense, but he's certainly someone who's read widely and he's synthesized loads of ideas from different aspects about thinking about the climate.
Well,
so
yeah, we all need the creativity and the stories, and where they overlap, that's where innovation comes from.
It gives us, I think, it gives us a mental toolkit to deal with the future when it arrives on our doorstep.
Do you have any advice to those who are watching and would like to go for a science fiction write or tackle into it? What is your advice on that?
Well, just write. If you feel the inclination to be a writer, you're probably already writing stuff. I would say that's probably a good indication. I mean, when I was a kid, you just couldn't stop me. I just produced reams and reams of stories. And I had been doing so since I was really small, and I'd written 2 novels in my teens, and I just never really stopped. And I think most of the writers I know who sort of have achieved some level of success in publishing, they would tell a similar story, that they were just compulsive writers from an early age. So I think most people who are kind of cut out to be writers, they already know it. And there's really no secret to success. It's just perseverance, hard work,
failure and learning and all the retry, go for it.
Yeah, keep going and going, and learn from your mistakes. And every now and again, the world will throw you, a coincidence or a bit of luck, and you've got to be ready to exploit those sort of moments when they happen. But they're all sort of stepping stones on the way to becoming a writer. I'm always careful, because I can tell people what worked for me 30 years ago, but that's in a completely different sort of media publishing landscape than exists now. So the things that really helped me get into publishing may not be applicable anymore. But I would say that the old constants of hard graft and perseverance and willingness to pick yourself up on and carry on certainly still apply.
Yeah, sure. What makes you enthusiastic? If we look at the science fiction scene right now, what is that grabs your attention and makes you enthusiastic? Oh, wow, that's great, let's do that, let's read that, let's write that.
Every time I take a little break away from reading science fiction, I'll read a mainstream novel or a historical novel or something. When I come back to science fiction, I'm always, that's why I read science fiction for. It lights up a part of my brain that no other, not only no other form of literature, but no other media can activate. And that also includes sort of cinematic science fiction. It just doesn't quite achieve the same neurochemical effect that science fiction on the page does. So I only need to take a short holiday from written science fiction. And then I come back and I fall in love with it madly.
And what happens in your brain? Are those ideas, innovations? What happens there?
I don't know. I mean, it's just something. I think literary science fiction gets into ideas more deeply than visual science. I mean, that's a sweeping statement. Obviously, there are exceptions to it. But by and large, even the best sort of adaptations of science fiction, or the best, things like Avatar, or The Matrix, they play with big ideas, but they're ideas that were sort of probably utilized in written science fiction 30 or 40 years earlier. So written science fiction is always massively ahead of the curve when it comes to playing with concepts and big ideas. So, if you want that hit of a genuinely weird or futuristic concept that you won't have encountered anywhere else, you really have to go to the written science fiction. And what's great is what I was saying earlier, is that science fiction is constantly overturning. It's constantly bringing in new writers with new voices, new concerns, And they're using the sort of methods of science fiction, but bending them to their own concerns and their own things that get them annoyed or excite them. And for that reason, science fiction often it changes in ways that can feel a bit uncomfortable if you've been reading it for decades.
Sure.
But that's what it's always done, and that's why it still sticks around and why it's still vital. So I'm as excited about science fiction as I ever was, and I'm as puzzled by it, confused by it, intrigued by it as I ever was. But that's in the intrinsic nature of science fiction.
If we take a look on the society level, how do you think we can reach the utopistic scientific breakthroughs? So what is the method there?
Well, if I had an answer to that question, I'd probably be running the world. I don't know. A lot of scientists draw inspiration from science fiction, but having worked in science, I know that a lot of scientists actually don't have any interest in science fiction at all. So there's that traffic of ideas is not a perfect one. So yeah, I struggle with that one a little bit. I mean, science is driven by so many different factors. There's commercial concerns. I mean, the area of science I worked in, space science, is relatively clean of commercial interest. But if you look at something like sort of big pharma or big medicine, it's such a sort of tangled web of different factors that play into it, from governments to sort of corporations down, and those have an impact on innovation as well, because innovation tends to go where the perception is that the money will be.
Exactly.
So it's a different ball game in sort of space science, I think, particularly astronomy, which is still looking at the universe through telescopes, basically, not trying to look for where the next game-changing drug will come from.
Then let's put the scope onto what makes you optimistic, because this is one of our favorite questions here as in Design Terminal, because we really think that innovation comes from a place where optimism is as well. So what is that? What is yours?
I'm a long-term optimist, and I think it came out of growing up in the 1970s and 1980s, where people of my generation, we were given this idea that nuclear war was all but inevitable. The tensions between the East and West seemed insurmountable. The proliferation of nuclear weapons, the arms race, mutually assured destruction. And then in the 1980s, there were tensions in the UK about cruise missiles, and every other news item was about the possibility of nuclear war of one type or another. And I found it really inconceivable that we would get to the year 2000 without some kind of catastrophe. So once we actually got through that by some miracle of good luck, I felt, well, this is just amazing. We've dodged that bullet. And for the current generation, obviously the great anxiety is climate change, but I don't dismiss that one iota. But I take the same optimistic view that we do have a shot at getting through these sort of bottlenecks if we sort of pull together. And I think in the short term, it's very easy to see sort of stupidity and bad actors messing things up. But I do believe in this. This maxim of, Martin Luther King said, something like the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. Oh. And I try to apply that to as many things as I can. And I think, we collectively as a species, we kind of screw up on the short term, but we are capable of not screwing up on a slightly longer term. Yeah, so I do cling to that, and I'm still broadly an optimist. I think we will navigate the sort of the climate crisis. I think broadly, common sense and science will win out, and we will work our way through this problem. But that's not in any sense to deny the reality of the problems. But I would just far rather be an optimist in the long run than a pessimist. So it's kind of like a mental switch, and just throw that switch in your head. Say, "Damn it, I'm going to be optimistic."
Yeah, it is, it is. So that's a good message in the end. Be a long-term optimist or an optimist. If you're a short-term pessimist, then you can still be a long-term optimist.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Alastair, for being with us, and good luck for your work. We shall continue reading you and just following you. Thank you very much for being with us.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for the wonderful opportunity to speak. It was a great pleasure. And, please enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you, everyone.
Surely we will. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Now is the time to announce the winner of the Space Tech Startups Pitch Battle. As you know, the aim was to provide an opportunity for promising X-Europe startups to present themselves and their solutions to this audience. So we will award the best startup based on the pitch and based on the performance and the solution they provide for the given specific problem. Our prize is a personal meetup with the jury. And the jury is István Sárhegyi, Zoltán Várdi, and Zsuzsanna Bódi, as you already know if you followed the pitch competition. So the winner is, I love their name, Neutron Star Systems! Congratulations! It's a superconductor-based electric propulsion system for more advanced space missions. It all sounds amazing. I hope Markus Collier-Wright, CTO, is online with us. Hi, Markus, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Thank you very much. I'm really extremely proud and delighted to have won the pitch contest. The other startups that were competing were also very strong. So yeah, it's a very proud moment for me and for the company. I want to say thank you to Design Terminal and also to X-Europe for the organization of the event and the opportunity to pitch. And we're really looking forward to our discussions with the jury. And hopefully this is the start of a fruitful relationship. So once again, thank you very much. And thank you for the great event.
Thank you very much, Markus, and congratulations again. I would throw confettis on myself, so like visually now you can see, and yourself too. Well done, and thank you for competing.
Next time I'll have some ready. Thank you.
Sure. Great. Thanks, and good luck.
Thank you very much.
So, what an amazing online summit, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for being with us. As you know, this event was organized by Design Terminal within X-Europe, a Horizon 2020 project framed under the Startup Europe initiative. My name was Andrea Josh, and Alexis Latham was also here. So thank you for being with us. Thank you for your questions, and good luck for the future, and Godspeed.